President Trump says once again he won't fire special counsel Robert Mueller, but his base is all fired up about the investigation, and the rhetoric is getting even more overheated. A former federal prosecutor joins us to help separate fact from fiction. Then Republicans, they're getting ready for final votes on their tax plan, but do they have the votes to pass it, and do they have the stomach to sell it? Also, as Puerto Rico tries to rebuild and recover from Hurricane Maria, we visited the island to get a first-hand look at what's really going on. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. And we begin tonight with the Russia probe as Fox News continues to ratchet up its rhetoric against special counsel Robert Mueller and the FBI.
The investigation into Donald Trump's campaign has been crooked from the jump. But the scary part is we may now have proof the investigation was weaponized to destroy his presidency for partisan political purposes and to disenfranchise millions of American voters. Now, if that's true, we have a coup on our hands in America.
This is not about politics. It's much bigger. I doubt in American presidential election history that there has been as great a crime or as large a stain on our democracy than that committed by a criminal cabal in our FBI and the Department of Justice who think they know better than we who our president should be.
The Mueller investigation is illegitimate and corrupt. And Mueller has been using the FBI as a political weapon. And the FBI has become America's secret police. It's like the old KGB that comes for you in the dark of the night, banging through your door.
The fix was in against Donald Trump from the beginning, and they were pro-Hillary. We understand people have political views, but they are expressing theirs with such animus and venom towards the now president of the United States. They can't possibly be seen as objective or transparent or even-handed or fair.
Not just inflammatory language, but check out the banner at the bottom of the screen that Fox News put up. A coup in America. Trump supporters, of course, bent out of shape about a whole bunch of things, especially the fact that this investigation exists at all. He called Trump an idiot and also texted, "I do hope his disorganization comes to bite him hard." This is all over Peter Strzok, who is the former FBI agent, dismissed from the case in July after it was discovered that he said some negative things. And here are some of the tweets calling President Trump an idiot, saying, "I so hope his disorganization comes to bite him hard in November," and "OMG, this is effing terrifying." And those folks are now even angrier because, well, that guy, Peter Strzok, he was dismissed from the case in July after it was discovered that those negative tweets came out. And he was sharing those tweets with another FBI employee who also happened to be his mistress. And now Trump's transition attorneys are accusing Mueller of getting unauthorized access to documents and emails. They say the emails were their property and shouldn't have been handed over without their approval. They say the Government Services Office, or the GSA, didn't have the legal authority to cough up that material to Bob Mueller. Now, Mueller's office released a statement, which is unusual for them, in response, saying, quote, "When we have obtained emails in the course of our ongoing criminal investigation, we have secured either the account owner's consent or the appropriate criminal process." Now, all of these new developments have increased speculation that Trump might fire Mueller and could do so as early as Friday, but last night he said he won't.
No, I'm not. No. What else? What, are you surprised?
And earlier today, I spoke with former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel about the investigation. So, Roland, let's start with those emails. They were turned over to the Mueller team by the GSA, not vetted by the Trump transition attorneys. Some basic questions first. Sure. Who owns those emails, and would it be proper for the GSA to turn them over to Mueller?
Well, it's my understanding, Andrew, from some of the reporting we've heard, that when the emails are stored on the GSA server, there is a waiver signed by those who use the email system that they become the property of the GSA. So I don't know how much standing any one of the email senders or recipients would have to object to the GSA's turnover of these emails if such a waiver is in place.
Is that something that Mueller's team would need a warrant for, or would it be like dealing with a telephone company if the company just hands over the information?
Things like this would typically be acquired by subpoena. So there would be a subpoena issued by Mr. Mueller's office to the GSA for these emails. They are sometimes acquired by search warrant. If there was a search warrant, there would have to be an affidavit filed in court to persuade a magistrate judge that there was probable cause to believe that there was evidence of a crime in these emails before they were acquired. But that wouldn't be necessary, and that's a lot of steps to take. Typically, they'd be acquired by subpoena.
And the Trump transition team is claiming that those emails are privileged. They cite attorney-client privilege and some other privileges as well. To the best of your knowledge, are those privileged?
Well, potentially there may be some emails that could be, in theory, privileged if they are emails from a client to an attorney seeking legal advice, or from an attorney to a client responding for a request for legal advice. My sense, Andrew, is that these are probably not attorney-client privileged in that way. My guess is that this is simply a kind of non-issue that's being raised to try to slow down the investigation. The Mueller team is incredibly experienced and I'm sure very careful. And if anyone on that team began to read an email that he or she believed might be attorney-client privileged, they would stop their review immediately and take procedures to make sure that the attorney-client privilege was preserved. And the last thing I'll say on that topic is that if there really was a problem, we wouldn't be hearing about it in the press the way we are. The Trump team would go to court to try to get the emails returned, and they haven't done that.
The reporting on this, on the questions about these emails, has been framed as something of a break in the cooperation between the Trump legal team and Mueller's team. Is it a break in cooperation to your mind? And if so, what would be the impact of that, particularly on the Mueller team?
I don't see this as a break in the cooperation. The Trump team really had no input into this, so it wasn't a matter of them cooperating or not cooperating. It's a break in the sort of PR process that they've engaged in so far, saying, oh, you know, nothing here, nothing to worry about, it'll all be over by Christmas type of talk. Now they're aggressively criticizing the Mueller team for whatever purpose they have. That's the difference. Now they are going all out to try to criticize Mueller and run him down in the eyes of the public. I don't think it will slow down Mr. Mueller or his team in any way. Seasoned prosecutors like Mr. Mueller and those working with him are very well acquainted with kind of public attacks like this. It's frankly a little like waving a red flag in front of a bull for guys like that. They're going to keep going, and they may even, work an extra hour tonight as a result.
Of course, a lot of the attacks in the press on the Mueller team have been focused on this quote-unquote bad FBI agent, the one who sent critical texts of the president to his mistress. By Fox News' logic, they say that's a coup. It's proof that Mueller team out to get Trump from the very beginning. Look, Christmas is this weekend. We're going to have a lot of family dinners. This question may come up at that family dinner or over Chinese food. If you're at a dinner with a relative spouting the Fox coup line, how do you respond?
I'd say that's right up there with Brer Rabbit begging not to be thrown into the briar patch. The fact is that the minute Mueller became aware of this issue with this agent, the agent was removed. So now Fox News and all of Trump's supporters are trying to make something out of the fact that Mr. Mueller acted appropriately to make sure that his investigation is as sanitized as possible. The thought that agents working on an investigation wouldn't occasionally say something negative about the target of the investigation, that agents would have political views that they might express from time to time to a girlfriend. This was borderline inappropriate for this agent to be talking that way. Mr. Mueller doesn't want anything even borderline inappropriate to taint the results of this investigation. And so this very able and experienced agent was asked to leave the investigation, but it certainly is not proof that the Mueller investigation itself is tainted. quite the opposite. It's proof that Mr. Mueller has done everything humanly possible to make sure that there is no bias in the investigation.
Roland, let's move on to Donald Trump Jr. He's had 2 interviews on the Hill in the past 2 weeks. Both have been called marathon sessions. What information might he have that lawmakers want? If you were asking the questions, what would you want to get out of him, and what's his potential legal exposure?
I don't know for certain, but these 2 lengthy interviews seem to have been prompted by the recent evidence that was provided by General Flynn and perhaps Mr. Papadopoulos. And I don't know what it is that Congress is spending 17 or 18 hours with Donald Trump Jr. Reviewing, but my sense is that there must have been prior statements to Congress that Congress and Mr. Mueller now believe were untruthful. And my guess is that Donald Trump Jr. is being confronted with the evidence provided by Mr. Flynn and Mr. Papadopoulos, and he's being asked to recant his prior statements or risk being charged with making a false statement to Congress. That's my sense of what it must be. Exactly what the topic is, I don't know. I mean, the hot topic has always been that June 9th meeting and the emails running up to it. And it could be that, but I don't know. Hard to tell.
And finally, Roland, a lot of talk this weekend about President Trump potentially firing Robert Mueller. If that happens, obviously there's a political reverberation that happens. From a legal standpoint, what happens? Is there a way to block Mueller from being fired? What would Congress have to do? Take us through the legal steps.
If Congress wanted to make Mueller impossible for Trump to fire, or even more difficult for Trump to fire, it's not an easy thing now. But if they wanted to make it more difficult or impossible, they will have to pass legislation that either puts more hurdles in his way, makes Mueller's investigation separate and apart from the Justice Department, and therefore, can't be fired by anyone at the Justice Department. There's a number of things they could do legislatively to protect Mr. Mueller. If Mr. Trump did fire Mr. Mueller, or even made a serious attempt at it, it's hard to believe that wouldn't be seen by all involved on Capitol Hill as a kind of constitutional crisis where one of the branches of our government was acting beyond the limits of its authority. We just had Assistant Attorney General Rosenstein testify last week that he saw no basis to terminate Mr. Mueller. And if we had a Saturday night massacre type of situation where Mr. Trump found someone after many attempts who was finally willing to fire Mr. Mueller, and Mr. Mueller was fired, I would hope and I would think that members of Congress would react very negatively to that and begin the impeachment proceedings that ought to be provoked by that kind of action by the executive branch. But it's hard to know. I mean, Mr. Trump has a big following in the Republican base, and the Republican members of Congress may not want to do anything to alienate that base. So it's very hard to know what will happen if he takes a step to really fire Mr. Mueller.
With all the talk of possibly firing Mueller, I keep thinking about the transition at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where the president put in somebody who basically wanted to reverse all the policies of the outgoing guy.
Right.
Is there any similarity? Right. Could Trump put somebody else in charge of this investigation and use that to protect himself more or undo what Mueller has done?
He could try. He could appoint a political friend, with the relevant experience. I'm thinking, Rudy Giuliani is clearly a huge Trump supporter. That would be kind of the equivalent, wouldn't it, of appointing Mick Mulvaney to the Consumer Protection, Financial Protection Bureau. He could try something like that, but again, that would be so transparently wrong and manipulative. One would hope that Congress would rise up and prevent it from happening by beginning the impeachment process and ultimately removing Mr. Trump from office for firing Mr. Mueller. I do think there's some fear on Mr. Trump's part that will happen, and that's why his office keeps saying that we have no intention of that. We don't know what Mr. Trump really intends, but time will tell.
Former federal prosecutor and our Russia Mueller investigation expert, Roland Riopel. As always, Roland, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Up next, the politics of the Russia probe. Republicans believe the president. Democrats believe the president is obstructing justice. We're going to look at where this is going and the political fallout next.